Hey friends, welcome to a brand new segment of Kimi's English podcast, where we take a deep dive into the most important and interesting news shaping our world right now. I am Ronnie.
And I am Kimi. If you want to stay informed and improve your English listening skills, you're in the right place. In each episode, we'll explore one big news story, clearly, slowly, and in simple, natural English.
We'll explain the background, break down key vocabulary, and give you our thoughts so you can understand what's happening in the world and also build your confidence in real-life English.
Whether it's global politics, science, technology, the environment, or culture, we'll help you learn, think, and speak in English about topics that truly matter.
Let's dive into today's topics: Iran versus Israel, a shadow war unveiled. Today's episode will cover our two new hosts. Let's go.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into, one of the most persistent and frankly explosive rivalries shaping the Middle East. That's the Iran-Israel conflict. It's a confrontation that's really been simmering since the late 20th century. And what's so compelling, I think, is that while there's never been a direct full-scale war between them—
Not a declared one, no.
Right. It's this incredibly complex shadow conflict. You've got proxy warfare, cyber attacks, intelligence ops, diplomatic maneuvering, regional alliances. It's a lot.
It really is a multi-layered chessboard.
Absolutely. So our goal with this deep dive is to give you a comprehensive but also nuanced understanding of this really volatile situation. We've sifted through our sources to pull out the key insights, the things you really need to know to be genuinely well-informed on a conflict that, let's face it, is constantly in the headlines. We're going to sort of unpack how these two nations went from, believe it or not, surprising allies to, bitter adversaries. Then we'll dive into the core issues, the deep divides fueling it all.
The why behind the hostility.
Exactly. We'll look at the key battlegrounds, Syria, cyberspace, where this shadow war actually plays out, before getting into the recent pretty dangerous escalations that suggest maybe a new, more direct phase is emerging.
Which is deeply concerning.
It is. And finally, we'll zoom out, look at the global reactions, the staggering potential human cost, and the unfortunately slim prospects for peace right now. So let's start by rewinding the clock. Way back, before 1979, the relationship between Iran and Israel, surprisingly cooperative.
It really throws people off when they first hear about it.
Right. Under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran had these discrete but definite diplomatic relations with Israel. They saw Arab nationalism and Soviet influence as kind of mutual threats.
A common enemy, or common concerns at least.
Yeah.
Which fostered cooperation.
Yeah, we're talking real cooperation, flourishing economic ties, joint oil projects, even agriculture. Israeli military and intelligence, like Mossad, were working closely with their Iranian counterparts, Sevak.
Close operational ties.
It's just so hard to imagine that level of cooperation today, isn't it?
It's an astonishing contrast. And what's truly insightful, I think, is understanding the sheer magnitude and the speed of that transformation. The 1979 Islamic Revolution under Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini wasn't just a regime change. It fundamentally redefined Iran's identity, its foreign policy, everything.
A total paradigm shift.
Completely. Khomeini brought in this powerful anti-Western and, crucially for the story, anti-Zionist ideology. Iran immediately cut diplomatic ties, started referring to Israel as the Zionist regime, saw it as illegitimate, a threat to Islam itself.
So it wasn't just political disagreement, it became ideological, existential almost.
Exactly. This seismic shift wasn't just a policy tweak. It embedded this deep existential ideological enmity that, it still defines the relationship today.
And this ideological overhaul was quickly put into action, wasn't it? Operationalized. Because hand in hand with the revolution came the rise of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
The guardians of the revolution.
They popped up as Iran's elite military force, tasked with protecting the new regime internally and, importantly, externally. And pivotal for our discussion is the Quds Force, right? That specific unit within the IRGC.
That's right. The Quds Force became the tool for extraterritorial operations, for supporting Iran's allies and proxies across the region, building that network.
So how deeply has the IRGC's expanding influence, it's not just military, it's economic, political too, and how much has that further entrenched this hostility toward Israel?
Oh, its influence is pervasive. It's everywhere and still growing. The IRGC isn't just a military branch, it's like a parallel power structure. It's deeply interwoven with Iran's revolutionary ideals, which makes its anti-Zionist stance not just, foreign policy, but a core part of the regime's identity. Its legitimacy, even.
Which brings us right to those core issues fueling the conflict, those deep divides you mentioned.
Exactly. That ideological hostility is fundamental. Iran's political identity, heavily influenced by Shia Islam and those revolutionary principles, it inherently frames Israel as this colonial, oppressive entity, an alien presence.
And the rhetoric reflects that consistently.
Consistently. When Iranian leadership, the supreme leader, IRGC commanders, routinely call for Israel's elimination, it isn't just political posturing. It's a deeply embedded foreign policy objective. It leaves almost no room for normalization, for shift in relations, without a fundamental change in Iran's whole ideology.
Okay, so ideology is key. Then there's maybe the most pressing concern, certainly for Israel and for many Western nations, Iran's nuclear program.
The nuclear file, yes.
Yeah.
Hugely contentious.
Iran insists it's purely peaceful, energy research.
That's the official line.
But there's widespread suspicion, obviously, that Iran is pursuing, or at least wants the capability to pursue, nuclear weapons. And Israel views a nuclear-armed Iran as, well, they use the term existential threat. Can you unpack what that really means in this context? What does existential signify for them?
Well, for Israel, an existential threat from a nuclear Iran isn't just about military balance changing. It's perceived as a threat to its very survival as a state. It implies a capability to inflict such catastrophic destruction that Israel's viability could be fundamentally undermined, maybe even, as some Iranian rhetoric has suggested, wiping it off the map.
So it's the ultimate red line for Israel.
Absolutely. And that perception drives Israel's consistent push for preventative measures. Everything from covert sabotage, which we'll get into,
right,
to intense diplomatic pressure, and even keeping the military option, a strike, very much on the table.
Which explains their fierce opposition to the 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA.
Precisely. They felt it didn't go far enough that it gave Iran a pathway, eventually, to a weapon, or at least the capability. Didn't dismantle the program sufficiently.
Okay, so if direct full-scale war is, for the most part, avoided historically, at least how do these two actually fight?
Proxy warfare, that's the main arena.
Right. Iran funds, arms, trains groups overtly hostile to Israel. We know the names.
Hezbollah in Lebanon, obviously a major one. Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, various Shia militias in Syria and Iraq.
And these groups launch rockets, conduct raids, cross-border attacks.
Keeping pressure on Israel's borders.
And Israel responds how?
Targeted assassinations, complex intelligence operations, sometimes large-scale military campaigns against these proxies, especially in Gaza and Lebanon. Airstrikes in Syria.
But what's the strategic thinking behind this proxy approach? You called it low-cost, high-impact. Why is it so effective for both sides beyond just dodging direct war?
Well, it's a classic example of asymmetrical warfare and, crucially, plausible deniability, especially for Iran. For Iran, using proxies lets them project power, pressure Israel, bleed its resources, all without necessarily inviting a direct, massive, retaliatory strike on Iranian soil. It keeps the conflict at arm's length.
Less risk, less cost than conventional war.
Much less. It allows them to probe Israeli red lines, maintain regional influence, kind of wage this war by other means. For Israel, well, it forces them to fight on multiple fronts against these non-state actors, which is draining, complex, while the main architect, Iran, often remains sort of insulated from the immediate consequences.
So the strategic genius, if you can call it that, is waging this continuous damaging conflict without triggering usually a massive international response or a full regional war.
That's the balancing act, yes. Though sometimes it comes very close to tipping over.
And adding to Israel's deep concerns here is strategic geography, this idea of encirclement.
Yes, the geographic dimension is critical for Israeli planners.
They're acutely worried about what they see as Iran's efforts to surround them. There's this concept they talk about, the Shia Crescent.
Stretching from Tehran through Iraq, Syria, and into Lebanon, right to the Mediterranean coast.
Exactly. And Israeli defense strategists warn this encirclement could enable a really terrifying multi-front war scenario.
Rockets flying from Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south, maybe even new fronts opening up from Syria or Iraqi militias simultaneously.
That's not just theoretical for them. It shapes their entire defense posture, their preemptive actions.
Indeed. And if you connect that to the key battlegrounds where this shadow war actually happens, Syria stands out. It's been the primary theater for years now.
Iran heavily backed Assad in the civil war.
Hugely. Weapons, money, military advisors, militia fighters, all aimed at keeping Assad in power, but also extending Iran's own influence, solidifying that land bridge, that crescent, to Lebanon and Israel's border.
And Israel's response.
Hundreds and hundreds of airstrikes inside Syria since around 2013, maybe even earlier, specifically targeting Iranian military assets, IRGC bases, Hezbollah weapon convoys, storage sites, anything perceived as a threat building near its northern border.
And Iran's reaction to these strikes in Syria has generally been restraint.
Yeah. Largely, yes, strategic restraint. They haven't typically launched major direct retaliations from Syria against Israel for these strikes, though there have been occasional limited responses, but the potential for escalation, a miscalculation leading to a bigger flare-up, is always there. It's a constant simmering tension.
A truly delicate, dangerous balance. And we should also acknowledge the human cost, right? While Israel says its strikes are targeted.
Civilian casualties have occurred, drawing international criticism. And Iran's deep involvement in the Syrian war undeniably prolonged that horrific conflict, contributing to millions displaced, widespread destruction. It's not a victimless shadow war.
Definitely not. Now, beyond the physical battlegrounds, this conflict has decisively moved into the digital age. Cyber warfare.
Oh, absolutely. A critical domain now.
Thinking back to, 2010? The Stuxnet virus.
Right. Widely believed to be a joint U.S.-Israeli operation.
Famously disrupted Iran's uranium enrichment. It targeted the centrifuges at the Natanz facility, a huge wake-up call.
It certainly was. And Iran learned from it. They've demonstrably developed their own pretty formidable cyber capabilities in response. Iranian cyber units have been blamed for attacks on Israeli water systems, private companies, even hospitals, critical infrastructure.
And on the other side, Israel's Mossad has been credibly linked, to assassinations of several key Iranian nuclear scientists.
And sabotage operations targeting nuclear facilities inside Iran. Explosions, fires, things that Iran blames on Israel.
So these aren't just isolated hacks or incidents. It's a continuous, covert battle on a new frontier.
Exactly. Where damage can be inflicted precisely, often without clear attribution, avoiding open military clashes. Both sides are investing heavily in AI, drones, advanced surveillance tech.
Israeli companies are world leaders in cybersecurity innovation. We know that.
They are. But Iran has built a pretty robust cyber army, reportedly with some help or collaboration from countries like Russia and North Korea.
So this digital front has the potential to disrupt economies, critical infrastructure, far beyond any physical battlefield. A whole new layer of vulnerability.
A major component of modern conflict, yes.
Okay, this brings us to some really concerning recent escalations, particularly in 2024 and early 2025. It feels like maybe a new phase, more direct.
There's definitely been a shift towards more direct confrontation, which is worrying.
The intensification really seemed to kick off after the Hamas attack on Israel in October 2023 and Israel's big military response in Gaza.
That definitely changed the regional dynamics, raised the temperature everywhere.
Right. And following that, Hezbollah significantly ramped up its rocket attacks from Lebanon into northern Israel,
prompting more forceful Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon, targeting deeper than usual sometimes. The northern border became very hot.
But what's particularly alarming, I think, are the reports from early 2025. Israel striking deep inside Iran itself, near nuclear facilities, reportedly.
That was a major escalation, crossing a significant threshold.
And Iran retaliated directly, didn't they?
Yep.
Launching long-range missiles, drone swarms into Israeli territory, targeting military bases, infrastructure.
They did. And while casualties were apparently limited on both sides in those specific exchanges.
The psychological impact, the political impact, huge.
Immense. It marked a direct state-on-state exchange that they had largely avoided for decades, breaking the old rules of the game, potentially.
And this just underscores the massive role the intelligence agencies play, right? Mossad versus IRGC intelligence, espionage, double agents, sabotage plots.
Constantly. That unseen struggle for strategic advantage is relentless. You mentioned Mossad allegedly thwarting an Iranian plot against Israeli diplomats in Europe in 2024. That's likely just the tip of the iceberg of what's going on beneath the surface.
Okay, so given all this complexity, this multi-layered conflict, how does it ripple outwards? What are the global reactions, the geopolitical effect?
Well, let's start with the United States.
Israel's staunchest ally.
Unquestionably. Providing massive military aid, crucial diplomatic backing at the UN and elsewhere.
But Washington is also deeply wary of a broader Middle East war, aren't they? They often urge restraint.
They do. U.S. policy has kind of oscillated, hasn't it?
Yeah.
You had the Obama era focus on diplomatic engagement, leading to the JCPOA.
Then the Trump administration pulled out, imposed maximum pressure sanctions on Iran.
Right. So it's this constant tightrope walk for the U.S. Support Israel, contain Iran, but avoid getting dragged into another major regional conflict.
Okay, what about the Arab states, particularly the Sunni majority ones like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain?
That's been one of the most fascinating shifts in recent years. Historically opposed to Israel, many of them.
But now,
Driven largely by a shared fear of Iran's regional ambitions, its nuclear program, its support for proxies, they've moved towards quiet and sometimes open cooperation with Israel.
the Abraham Accords in 2020 being the prime example, normalizing relations.
Exactly, which further isolated Iran regionally and created this new alignment, basically an anti-Iran bloc that's really redefining the Middle East power map.
Then you have the other big players, Russia and China.
Right. Russia's a key player, especially because of its deep involvement in Syria. It maintains ties with both Israel and Iran, but has definitely grown closer to Tehran recently. Shared interests, opposition to U.S. influence.
And China.
China's primarily focused on expanding its economic influence. Big investments in Iranian energy, infrastructure, as part of its Belt and Road Initiative.
So what's their stance on the conflict itself?
Both Russia and China generally oppose unilateral military action, whether by Israel or the U.S., against Iran. They advocate for diplomacy, stability on their terms, of course. They position themselves as alternative powers to the U.S. in the region.
And the European Union, where do they fit?
The EU consistently emphasizes diplomacy. They were key architects of the JCPOA and have often pushed for its revival. They try to play a balancing act, condemning Iran's support for groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, but also criticizing Israeli actions like settlement expansion. Their main goal is usually de-escalation and preserving diplomatic channels.
Okay, so with all these interwoven factors, all these players, let's talk about the potential consequences if this shadow war ever boils over into full-scale direct conflict. The human cost.
It would be devastating, truly catastrophic.
We're talking mass casualties, potentially, from missile attacks on cities in both countries and definitely in surrounding areas.
Massive displacement of civilians. Again, think about Lebanon, Syria, Gaza areas already incredibly fragile. Millions could be forced to flee.
The economic impact?
Severe. Immediate spikes in oil prices, global market instability, and terrifying environmental risks, too, especially if nuclear facilities were hit, intentionally or accidentally. The fallout could be regional, even global.
And this raises that crucial question, the risk of a wider war.
It's incredibly high. A direct Iran-Israel war could easily suck in other powers. The U.S. would likely feel compelled to intervene to defend Israel.
Regional allies might get involved. NATO could be drawn in. Arab states might take sides.
You could see a regional conflagration that destabilizes the entire Middle East, with ripple effects far beyond.
And the economic fallout, you mentioned the oil markets.
Critical. Iran sits right on the Strait of Hormuz, a vital choke point. Nearly 20% of the world's oil passes through there.
If Iran tried to close it or even just threaten shipping,
energy prices would skyrocket globally. It would trigger a worldwide economic crisis. And Israel's own economy, heavily reliant on tech, global trade, would face huge disruption too.
So given all this potential devastation, these massive risks, what are the prospects for peace, for de-escalation?
Sadly, they remain incredibly slim right now.
Both sides see each other as fundamental existential threats, that ideological chasm we discussed earlier.
It seems almost insurmountable from their current positions. There's very little trust, deep-seated animosity built up over decades.
But are there any avenues, however narrow, for reducing tensions? Anything that could pull them back from the brink?
Well, people talk about sustained diplomatic re-engagement, maybe through international mediators, the UN, the EU, perhaps others. Trying to reopen channels. Stronger nuclear agreements, if they could ever be negotiated with much tougher verification, might ease some concerns. Addressing the core nuclear fear. Exactly. And focused efforts to de-escalate the proxy conflicts, particularly in Syria and Lebanon. Trying to contain those flashpoints.
What about pressure from outside or from within?
Civil society movements, international pressure, they could play a role over time, maybe pushing leaders towards less confrontational paths. But honestly, as long as that deep ideological enmity remains and the regional power struggles continue, the Iran-Israel conflict is likely to stay unresolved, highly volatile, and a major source of instability.
So wrapping this up, what's our main takeaway from this deep dive? It seems clear the Iran-Israel conflict isn't just some isolated bilateral issue. It's a defining, really enduring feature of Middle Eastern geopolitics.
Absolutely. Profound global consequences.
It spans decades. Ideology, military power, cyber warfare, proxy battles, constantly shifting alliances, power balances.
And while that full-scale direct war has somehow been mostly avoided so far,
The risk of miscalculation, of sudden, rapid escalation, it feels ever-present, maybe more so now than ever.
it does. So maybe the question for you listening is, what does this really reveal about modern conflict, especially in our interconnected world where those lines between war and peace seem increasingly blurred? And how might understanding these deep historical currents, these persistent tensions, help you interpret the headlines, the future events, with perhaps a bit more insight, something to think about?
That's all for today's deep dive. We hope you now understand the topic more clearly and feel more confident discussing it in English.
And remember, it's not just about the news. It's about using English in real-life conversations. So don't just listen, talk about it, write about it, and keep practicing.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Kimi's English podcast. We post new episodes every day to help you grow in fluency, step by step.
And we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on today's story? Leave a comment and share your opinion in English.
Thanks for listening, and see you in the next episode.